Caroline runs through the tool itself, which I think far and away is the most interesting element. So this piece of work really had its origin in I think long-standing discussions in West London, not least through our sub-regional skills and employment board, on the pressing need for better insights into demand for skills and supply of skills across the sub-region. It's not unique to West London, but it's a challenge that we were feeling quite acutely, and also where the gaps are, really with an aim of helping to inform a more responsive skills system. And of course, since the idea was really pulled together, and we pulled together an original brief for this project, of course, the pandemic hit, which has brought all of this into even sharper focus, in that the need for a responsive skills system is doubly important as we look forward to the challenges of economic recovery, and the need to step up provision in a responsive and agile way to help people both reskill and upskill. So in a way, the case for this particular piece of work to help improve those insights for commissioners, funders, and conceivably also individuals looking at information around careers and so on, it's particularly important now. And it's absolutely at the heart of our economic recovery plan, Build and Recover, where we're looking at the need for improved labour market data and the benefits of a responsive skills system. I should stress it's a starting point. It's a good starting point, and the team at Institute for Employment Studies and Rocket Science have done a cracking job in getting us this far. We're not suggesting it covers the whole picture, and we'll come to this, I'm sure, during the course of the presentation. But what we do have within this is a good picture of demand in terms of projections at a relatively granular level of detail, and that I think across our geographies are first presented in this way, and matching that to a very good idea of provision, notably at the moment on the further education college side. So major thanks to the FE college principals, particularly for working so collaboratively with us on this. We haven't got to the point of folding in higher education provision, or indeed that of independent training providers. That should be something that we look to come to in some way in the future, but I think what this does provide is a really good basis to build on. So that's just really some of the context from our side as to how this piece of work arose. It will in time live on the West London Alliance website and be fully openly accessible as a tool to use as people on this call and others see fit. But I'll hand over to Caroline to take us through the nuts and bolts of the tool now. Thanks.
Brilliant, thanks David. And with all these things around technical issues and so on, we'll try our very best, but I've had some amazing or really difficult things happening when I'm trying to present stuff online, including a power cut and other things, so hopefully that won't happen today. Okay, so just really to give you background to the agenda, what I'm going to do is, we've just had our introduction. I'm going to give a background to the project and try and do a live demo and show you the way around the tool. And then I want to have a sort of Q&A session, and then we'll just tell you about what we're doing next. And as Lisa said, if you want to ask any questions at any time, just please use the chat function. And I think also importantly, if you want more information and links, if you could send your email address privately to Lisa in the chat function, that means that we'll be able to get any of the slides and other information to you quickly. Okay, so let's just kick off with just skills data. I think Mark mentioned earlier that he remembered me from the last century, which makes me feel really old, but having been in the employment skills for quite a long time, I think we all know that the skills system in England is incredibly complex. The scope and the scale of the qualifications that's on offer, the commissioning of funding of courses and training, and there's a lot of criticism, I think, on the lack of connection between employment demand, what employers want, and what government funded and supported skills provision provides. And in part that's because getting real sort of good detail about where the jobs are coming from is really important, and can actually be pretty costly to try and do that all of the time, because you go to sort of economic forecasters to help you do that, but also in the sort of transparency of what's being provided, and not really knowing. So I think, I often reflect on the skills system, when you try and map it, is a really messy map of courses, and it's very hard to sort of connect the dots. And I think the other thing to sort of just bear in mind is that our education provision or learning provision is very much learner-led, learner-driven rather than employer-led. And I think things will need to change and move forward. But I think what we need to try and do is really to help the whole system, not just learners, not just the colleges, but advice and guidance advisors, employment advisors, parents, young people, adults, all of those people, to just really understand the importance of getting access to the skills that employers need. I think this tool is going to be a potential game changer. And the reason why is that when we were asked to do this work, we had to source data that could be readily available and accessible, and that could be readily updatable without costing any more money. So if you can imagine, starting with that premise, we had to really think about how could we make sure that this tool could be constantly updated without having to bring people like myself and Becky in to do that for you. So we've had to really think about the sustainability of the tool. The second thing is actually getting hold of supply data is actually really easy. The problem is that what you have to be able to do is to match courses to the SOC codes that are produced in demand data. And the problem is that none of the courses that we've sort of looked at actually linked to a SOC code, which meant we had to manually work through, I think, sort of 2,500 courses and find the appropriate SOC code. But it's actually very easy to do. And that's the only thing that's missing. And if we could get all provision linked to a SOC code, then matching the supply of skills to demand data that's coming out from BES and other GLA is actually really, really simple. And we're hoping that by enabling providers and showing providers how to do this, that's really going to open up a whole range of opportunities to be able to just provide a set of data each year about what's available, linked by stock codes, and matching it to the demand data each year is going to be very easy.
Caroline, sorry to interrupt. There are some people waiting in the waiting room.
Oh, right, sorry.
Need to be admitted. I'm very sorry.
Okay, no worries. That's the trouble with going on full screen. See, this is oh, blimey, 10 people. Good job that we're recording this. Okay. Well, let me just go to this screen then, because I think that will be easier, just in case other people join. So the only other thing to bear in mind is that we think there's an opportunity, and I'll come back to this a bit later about next steps, about making all of this data far more accessible and transparent for the benefit of everybody. And a lot of this is public data. It's funded by the taxpayer, and I think it's really important that people are able to access this information and use it without having to pay for analysis all over again. So we've borne that in mind, and we've had that sort of front and centre in terms of our approach to this. So that just really sets the scene for the tool. So why have we built this tool? It should move over. So sort of coming back to this issue and challenge of really understanding what employers, where the jobs are coming from and where the skills are. We're hoping that the data is going to help shape future interventions and also help around lobbying government and other bodies. I think over time it's going to really show the effects of COVID on the local labour market. We've just been doing a piece of work to look at how local authorities are responding, and I think generally the view is that we're not really going to see the full impact of COVID on the labour market until even this time next year, with potential lockdowns coming in and out of lockdowns and furlough, and not really seeing that sort of translate through. So it's just really important to sort of bear in mind that I think a lot of the there will be quite a lot of shifts, and this is why it's really important to keep a track on trends. And I think the most important thing here is really just helping WLA sort of align the local inclusive growth strategy, really make sure that we're really understanding what's happening in the labour market, and that we've got a real sense of what's out there, to avoid duplication, to potentially sort of focus on sort of centres of excellence around particular occupations, to make sure that because you're obviously quite a diverse and big group of authorities, that those courses are accessible to people. So but there's another bit of background about why we built this tool, but I think hopefully it's going to make a real difference. Let's talk about some caveats. So I think David alluded to these earlier on, and really importantly that we're at the beginning of this journey. So in the context that I've provided about making this free, making this something that's sustainable, that can be accessed, I think it's really important to recognise that we're at the beginning of this journey. And I think over the next year or so, as more data becomes available, as we get more providers signed up, and more functionality, because I think, again, I'll come on to next steps, it would be great if we could take this off a Google Sheet platform. And we've used Google Sheets because it's quite easy to access and there's no licensing fees and all those things, but we may need to think of another tech solution in the future. So we are at the beginning of the journey. We had to make a decision on how to connect demand data with supply data. And I've talked to you before about the second stock codes being quite critical to this. So that's why there's an absence of entry-level qualifications, and also those qualifications that are not linked to particular industries and occupations. So when you're looking at the places, it's very much in those courses that can be linked to occupations. There has been the focus on FE provision, probably in light, so that's where there is most sort of government investment in skills. And again, I just want to share David's feedback to the colleges, just how helpful it's been to work with them, and I think they really deserve a round of applause for helping us get to this far, and for being really helpful to get the tool underway. Higher education's missing at the moment, and I think one of the challenges there is about how can they provide information that helps align sort of graduate, postgraduate courses to specific occupations. I'm hopeful we shall find a way in the next iteration. And I think there are some elements of entry-level qualifications that could be linked to occupations. So let's see how that can be done in the next iteration, things that are relevant, particularly for working on building sites or in care homes or in retail. There will be some elements of courses that perhaps will have some link to that on the entry level, but we're looking at that in the next iteration. And I suppose the only other consideration here is that, yes, we can get the demand data, we can do all of that and analyse that, but the tool's only going to be successful if providers submit their data. And I think what we've been able to create is something very, very simple that providers will be able to complete on an annual basis. And if they could just help us identify the SOC code for their courses, it's a very, very simple case of putting the two data sets together and developing some code at the back of it to be able to pull it together. So there are some caveats. Let's move on to how have we done it? So I've talked a little bit about how we've looked at supply side, but the demand side is really interesting. I think what we had to do is look at, I think you commissioned some work from Oxford Economics, so we were looking at, how could we use those? The problem is obviously it's proprietary, so it's not repeatable, it's not publishable, and it's relatively static. We also had to make sense of, could you use things like Adsuna or Burning Glass or those, and they're fine, but they look retrospectively and not forward. So and again, they're proprietary, so you'd have to keep paying the license for those things. So we opted for using public data sets, and actually when we analysed the OE predictions with the public data sets, there wasn't actually that much difference between what the estimates were. We felt that in the balance of making things available and sustainable, that option 2 was the the best way of doing that. There are some challenges around granularity, because the further down you go, it's estimates on estimates on estimates, because you're using secondary data sets. But I think, you know, again, over time, those things might become a lot easier. And I think, you know, what we are seeing generally across the sector is much greater access to data and refinement of data. So, you know, I expect that will change and things might look quite different and more helpful in years to come. When we've looked at the supply side, so again, you know, we've looked at what we could do. You may know about the individualised learner record and the data cube. The problem is that actually you can't use a lot of the data that's in the data cube, so it's got a lot of caveats and data protection around it, so we couldn't use it. And also it only shows actual places and it's retrospective rather than the places that are available. So what we've tried to do is to make sure that we are looking at forward-looking at the places available. And also just reiterate, we're looking at level 2. What we've been able to do is develop a map between qualifications, sector subject areas, SIG and SOC codes. I know my colleagues were sort of pulling their hair out. It was a manual job, and the only other thing to bear in mind is that at the moment everything's used on SOC 2010 in terms of the public estimates, but they're moving to 2020. So what we've done is future-proof the data, so that when you do get new data, we can incorporate SOC 2020 data. I sound like a bit of a nerd, don't I? But anyway, so we've been through all that process. So the kinds of things we've taken on supply side, we've looked at the course title, qualification number, sector subject area, which is the off-call designation, MVQ level or equivalent, the duration by weeks and hours per week, the target places, the actual places, the numbers of unpaid places, and percentages of students from within the WLA catchment and delivery location. And what that's enabled us to do is then to say, you know, obviously we know that colleges have provided, obviously take people in from all different parts of London, but what it's been able us to do is just estimate how much provision is going towards students within WLA catchment. So what I'm going to try and do now, maybe if I just take a break and breathe for a minute, that might be helpful. I've just wondered, Lisa, is there any questions at the moment or clarifications that people would want before I move into a demo?
Yes, I've just put a reminder in the chat, and there actually was a question. So there's a question about apprenticeships. So are apprenticeships included, or are there plans to add them in the future?
Anything that's there is included that's related to a vocational occupation, so yes, but I think what may not be included is those that are provided through private providers and that are not FE provided apprenticeships. So that's what's missing, but the idea is to obviously put those in.
Thank you. Yeah, that's it for now.
Oh, right, dodged a bullet there. Okay, all right. So let's have a look. So what we've done is essentially looked at, I think, 1,200 individual courses. We've looked at 369 occupations. And what we've been able to do is to develop a tool that's split into 2 sections. And I'm going to try my very best now to stop sharing this bit and move on to the online tool. So I'm just wondering, can people see that? Can you see that, Lisa?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Right. So what will happen is when we get to when you get to the link on the website, and I don't know when that's going to come up, David, in terms of be on the website, but this link is available now, and when you sort of land on it, what you'll land on to is a helpful notes page. So even if I'm have trouble sort of demonstrating this to you today, there is some very sort of helpful notes on the landing page which shows you how to interrogate the tool. What it will tell you is how best to download it, how to interrogate the data, where to look for the data, and what you need to do to get access to different bits of information. So hopefully we've created it so it'll be incredibly easy for you to use. It's just really if you've used a complicated Excel sheet or an interactive dashboard in Excel, this is very this is exactly the same, albeit on Google Docs. So that's your help notes. So really important that you read that first. But what happens is when you go into supply and demand, it takes a while, sorry, there's always a bit of a delay. What you have here is your sort of landing page, which is basically a dashboard that's bringing together all the information into one place, and I'm just going to talk this through with you now. So hopefully you can see my cursor. So what we've got here are sort of 5 sets of collated data. This part here is a summary of the data of your selection. At the moment it's got all of the data in it, and what it will show you is the course places, demand, and the places versus demand. And if it's a positive number, that shows more places than demand. Here on the light green, we've got places by provider. So at the moment it is just showing the colleges, but what will happen is in the next iteration, hopefully we'll have other providers in there, and it will show us what the profile of places, total places, looks like across the level 5 qualifications. So that's 2, 3, 4 and 5 plus. On the orange segment here, what this shows you is demand by local authority. So what we've done is looked at the predicted demand, total jobs, and that total demand in the year, and what that means, and what that on the average, and what that looks like in terms of comparing that against the courses that are available. And I think what you can see here is a sort of quite clear picture of reducing sort of level 2s and increasing sort of level 4 and 5 qualifications in terms of the demand. But again, a lot of that will come down to not having all the data in here. So once we've got that, we may have a better picture. And then in the light blue section here, what we've got are places, demand, jobs by sector subject area. So what it's done is it's collected all of that data, and it is showing you what that looks like across the sector subject areas. And because there has been some rounding of figures, then there might be some slight differences. And I also think that, correct me if I'm wrong, David, that I think this time next year, when we've got greater clarity on the impact of COVID on the economy, I think there'll be quite a lot of change, and I'll come back to how we hope to sort of measure that over time by creating another function in the tool. And then just below all of this, we've got the details of all the courses meeting the criteria. So what will happen once you've made a selection, at the moment it's looking at the whole, it will tell you what the course title is, who is the provider, what's the sector subject area, what level it is, the hours required on the course, and the numbers of places. And I think the hours was quite important for us, because one of the things that we wanted to get a sense of is whether the scale of part-time and full-time opportunities, given that a lot of people may not necessarily have the time to be able to attend a full-time course. So we are trying to sort of understand what is available on a part-time basis and what's available on a full-time basis. And I think as over time, we'll be able to sort of develop that that greater functionality. So that's what it will show you. What we have on the left-hand side is your selection. So what we've done is created a series of drop-down boxes for you to select what you want to look at and what you want to analyse. So we've got a tab that enables you to look at by college, by local authority area, by sector subject area, by occupation sector, by occupation, or by NVQ level or equivalent. And you can have any one or all of a selection. I think the more you select something, probably the less data that might be available. And I have tried some of this around childcare and care placements, and I think obviously the further down you go to local authority or specific occupation, you were only going to get what data is available for that course and that subject. So let's have a go, and let me just pick on, what am I going to pick on? Let me pick on the boroughs that link with the OPDC area, and the only reason I'm doing that is because we've just worked with them on the skills strategy there. But I think it would just be helpful to show you that what I might want to do is look at what the course places look like with those three boroughs in view of what the OPDC skill strategy might be telling us in terms of what it needs. And by clicking OK, what it will do is it will take some time, and what you can see up here is a green bar that tells you how long it's going to calculate the formulas. It's going back and it's pulling all the data together. It's obviously taking a lot longer because I'm presenting it online, and we have issues always with broadband connectivity, but in time, ta-da, is that right? It will hopefully show some change. Okay, so it looks like it's showing some change. What it's enabled me to do is it's shown here that in Brent it looks like what the total demand of jobs are likely to be, and how that links into the different qualification levels. It's also showed how that sort of relates to the different sectors as well, and what that means in terms of oversupply or undersupply. One of the things that I will say that's really helpful for you to do is to make sure that if you want to interrogate at different levels, your best way is to either clear all of the options and then just pick on one or all of or some of the ones that you want to look at. I'm going to pick on Harrow because Mark's here. I think Victoria's here as well. So let's see what that looks like for Harrow. It's taking time to bring all the data up. I will say that this is actually relatively instantaneous when you've got it downloaded on your laptop or on your computer. So that's what it looks like for Hammersmith, for Harrow. So you can see there is a demand of, there's some demand at level 3 and sort of high demand at level 5, and what that looks like in terms of the places versus demand. So it's really helpful because you're able to then sort of get a real granular view of what's happening in your local authority. Let me go back. Let me just select all again and OK, because I just want to go back to the main data. And it might be that actually what I want to do is look at let's look at a sector subject area in more detail, and let's see what that looks like. So let's have a look at. Let's pick one. Let's take a bit of time to load up. And let's have a look at the sector subject area. So let's say I want to look at health and public services and care. So what I can do is, there's obviously quite a long list here. So rather than scrolling down, let me just clear all and then click health, public services and care. Click OK. And then a little bit of updating at the back end. Starts to show what that looks like. And down here, what this is, let's look at the details of the courses. This will show you the number of courses that are available related to that sector subject area. So the numbers of places that are available. It's just taking a bit of time to move down, sorry. And you can scroll down to see all of the courses and where they are. So the functionality of this is really easy. It is just a case of you picking what you want to look at and having a play around with it. I think the good news is, hopefully the good news is that you can't do anything to change the back end or the data, so you can't break it. The only thing that you would need to do is, if you were doing a new search, is just to make sure that you are picking the right fields and options here. So that's the supply and demand tool and what that looks like now. And again, we're looking at, and I'll come back to this in terms of next steps, what that might mean for the future and where we take this tool. The second tab shows you what the 2021-2030 demand looks like by sector subject area and by local authority. So what we've done here is just put the data in, align it, and then these bars here show you what that looks like over the next 10 years. So it's a kind of mini bar chart to show you where the growth or the decline is likely to be against those sector subject areas. What you can also do, and I've already done this, is looked at Brent, Ealing and Hammersmith and Fulham and what that might mean in terms of jobs, forecast employment change across those boroughs. What I can do, again, following these two light blue bars, I can easily select all and click OK, and it shows me what that looks like eventually when it's clicks through, what that looks like across the 7 boroughs. What it also does is produce this chart here, which looks at the highest demand occupation sectors and also the lowest demand occupation sectors. So you can start to see where some of those differences and changes are happening. But I think, well, this is really helpful. If you were looking at particular jobs, you could then sort of go in and really think about what that might mean in terms of your places and where you might need to sort of look at your provision and think about where you want to invest or supplement your courses. What we're hoping to do as each iteration comes each year for the tool is that there will be a third tab here, which will compare the estimates on the 2021-2030 demand on an annual basis and compare that with the supply on an annual basis. So we'll start to get a trends analysis of how and if the data that's coming through is true and if that's making any shift in terms of how that provision is supported. So I've still got people coming in through the room. And I think that's probably as much as I want to share, just really to show you the functionality. I don't want to go into too much detail about what it's telling us. So there's a whole report that analyses this, and that will also be made available at the time. But I just wanted to show you just how simple it was. It's a case of clicking on the link, viewing it probably at 90% on your screen, and then just having a play around with it and looking at what using these different blue tabs in terms of your selection. I think I'm going to stop sharing for the moment and go to some Q&A. So I don't know, Lisa, if there's...
there are quite a lot actually. So just
Becky, I don't know if you could help, if Becky's here, if you could unmute yourself, put your video on, that would be great to help me.
So there's a range of just specific questions on the tool, something more around what's included and updating, and then more common. So I will start with the more technical questions first. There was a question on the regional breakdown. So is sector subject area a sub-regional figure, or can it be by borough?
It's by borough.
Okay.
Everything is down to borough level and provider level where appropriate.
Great. A question on time periods. So what are the time periods relating to the change in demand?
So we've looked at demand through till 2030 based on the currently available data. So does that address that one?
I would think so. So if the person who asked the question feels it's not answered, then maybe put another one in the chat. So yeah, we take it as answered. There was a question on SIG, so how the data links to SIG codes. So how do the sector subject areas map onto the SIG?
So there's a whole bit of work behind all of this. So all you're seeing is the front end of lots and lots and lots of different pieces of analysis. Each course is aligned with a SIG code, the sector subject area, and the SOC code. So that forms the three bits that link it to the demand. Sorry, David, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just to come in on that, and maybe something we haven't specified here because we're walking through the tool itself, is that there's quite a substantial full report which we will be putting on the West London Alliance website that sets out some of these questions in quite a lot of detail, drills down into the methodology used and so on, which we'll share with this group and wider. So I think some of the questions will probably be answered through that report. But back to you, Caroline.
Okay, thanks, David. Lisa.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Again, on the forecast data, so Becky probably can answer. So what data insight is the forecast data based on?
So we were drawing on publicly available data, so primarily accessing it through NOMIS. So this is really the annual population survey and the quarterly labour force survey data. We were very much guided by the forecasts that Oxford Economics had supplied to sort of guide us and sort of make sure we were sort of coming in the same range and sort of coming to a plausible set of forecast figures. But through using public data sets, these then become something that are updatable again, sort of within the West London Alliance, rather than being reliant on drawing on consultants every time. So that was the basis as well.
Great, Becky. And we had a follow-up on the time periods. So it was specifically about the data presented in the first tab. Is that looking at change in demand from 2021 to 2030 when we're comparing the supply and demand?
The supply figures are for 1 year at the moment, so they've looked at the places that are funded for the year ahead. So there is a difference between what we can access on the supply and what we can access on the forecasting of demand. So providers receive their funding from DFE, and that determines the places they can make available in any year. So that's the basis at the moment. There may be options if providers are able to predict what they would wish to draw in the future in respect to funding, but of course, until they get that funding confirmed from DFE, it's slightly more challenging. David, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry to interject again, but just on a linked point that I think on the updating question that came up, because it links to what you just said, Becky. I think again what comes out in the full report is quite how, and I maybe regret saying this, quite how straightforward updating is given the sources that we've sought to use, all of which are publicly available. So yes, there'll be at the moment a manual job of work on the provider side, but we've got a methodology for doing that in the way the data's been collected. But it's largely from, I think I'm right in saying, public sources. So updating is relatively light touch. Yes, it's a job, but it's relatively light touch.
Okay, thank you. And while you were just responding to that, so there was a question on the updating. Someone said this looks really helpful, but my main question relates to how can we ensure that the data remains up to date over time?
And I think that builds on the relationships that David and colleagues at WLA have with providers, particularly, and working to extend who's supplying data to the tool. So it has, as Caroline set out, the capacity to integrate more around provision to really get to a more granular and detailed picture. So it's about that collaboration, really, to then get the data into the tool.
Great.
I kind of echo that, Becky. I mean, what we've done is we've created a very simple spreadsheet that any training provider that is delivering training should be able to complete, with the difference of not having a SOC code attached to it. And there's a very simple way, using a very simple tool online, to actually source it, and it takes seconds. So if providers would commit to doing that, you wouldn't have to do the sort of manual searches that we've had to do, and it will just all come together. So it's a very simple way of doing it. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that what we are trying to do, and it's part of the next steps conversation, is to see whether this is the opportunity for us to create an open data standard for the provisions of skills information in the West London area. And we've got discussions happening with the Open Data Institute, with some people in the GLA. We've also talked to Nesta, all those, and I'll come back to that in a minute, about knowing that we've come back down to the source of the data and where it comes from, being able to build it up and add other things. So, you know, it's been designed to be able to take on all of the data that's available on supply, on the basis that providers provide it in a way that we can just import it into the tool.
Great. Yeah, linked to that, so there was a bit of a discussion or a couple of comments around other data that would be useful and should be added. So questions around whether it's possible and whether there are plans to integrate higher education and ITP data into the tool.
Shall I comment on that,
sorry.
Caroline?
Yeah, David, thanks.
Yeah. Caroline's talked about the fact that there's a simplicity inbuilt in this tool to adding this data. So as and when it's available, it can be slotted in with relative ease. I think, and I'll leave Becky and Caroline to talk about some of the challenges on matching data from HE courses, particularly to standard occupational classifications, which is a bit of an issue. It's not insurmountable. So to come back on some of the points, we don't have a firm timeline, but in response to what Caroline said about potential for expanding this and interest in support in doing that, I would hope that the immediate next step would be exactly that, looking at how we fold in the wider picture, and absolutely take on board the comments in the chat. It is only a start. We certainly won't present this as being the full picture. There are issues with HE currently not being in there. It needs to be as soon as we can. Similarly, private training providers. I think they're a challenge on the private training provider point, particularly on geography, because of course the location of delivery isn't necessarily as bound by local government boundaries. Similarly, of course, and I see Tracy McIntosh made the point that we haven't folded in data from colleges outside the WLA area delivering within WLA, so that it isn't perfect. So it will be indicative, but I think over time, with some resource, we can factor all of these in. But point taken that it does need to be built on, certainly.
Great, thank you. A slightly different angle on broadening the tool. There was a question around the delivery online versus face-to-face. Will there be a way in the future to analyze by courses provided online as well as face-to-face, and a blended combination of both?
So I think this comes down to the accessibility of courses generally, and I think absolutely there's absolutely a very easy way of saying, is it blended, is it face-to-face, is it online, or is it fully online? So those criteria can be added onto quite simply. It's obviously just an additional bit of information that providers will need to feed into the tool. I think what's happened generally, if you look at COVID, there's been a complete shift to digital delivery. I think what we know and what we're seeing is that those people that are further left behind have been even further left behind because they're not engaging with digital, and we know that face-to-face has a really important role in terms of supporting people. That said, there are people that will be in work that won't be able to attend a full-time course. So this issue about understanding part-time versus full-time versus whether it's going to be free or whether it's actually subsidised by the learner is actually other information that can be built on Untitled. I think what we wanted to make sure was that we got the basics right, because once you've got the basics, you can build up. If you try and start with this really complexity here, we'd find it very, very difficult. So it's about the layering, and why I said right at the beginning we're on the start of the journey. I think the next thing, the next stage would be, and we've created the opportunity, we've got the tool, the next iteration of the tool ready to have data put into it, and that could be done sooner rather than later, David, if people wanted to add that data in. It's ready to roll, and I think if we could show a commitment across the provider community within the West London area that we can actually bring this data to life and together, it's really going to accelerate, and I think be a shining light to other places. You know, I think this tool's got real opportunity to be replicated. I think it's got opportunity to go to scale across London and in other places. I think it will be transformational because, you know, when we have to do employment skills strategies, people say, oh, can you map what provision is there? I mean, I do not want to spend another, sorry, just from a public spending point of view, as a consultant, we don't want to spend more money doing the same job over and over again when actually there's no need to do that job. You know, it's something that data and open data can really facilitate. So I think it's just really important that we see this as an opportunity. I think WLA have been really brave in terms of taking the first step, and I think essentially I do feel that this has got an opportunity to scale and you become, if you like, a demonstrator of innovation in this field.
Just one more point before maybe you can go back to your slide deck, was a comment around the importance of adding data below level 2. Maybe you could just briefly say something about that.
Okay, so the SOC is king, the standard occupational classification is king. So in all of this, so if you're able to make the case for a particular occupational sector for a particular course that's relevant for that, then yes, we can. I think the problem with a lot of entry level provision is it is non-vocationally, non-occupationally specific, although actually in practice it is, but in terms of how it's done. So I think absolutely yes, and I think we can do that. I think there is a huge other bit of complexity about level 1 and entry level provision that is again, I think a cause of a lot of duplication and confusion in terms of what happens. But I think, you know, that is a provision that is commissioned by GLA, ESF. I know that's moving on. You know, a lot of that level 1 provision is not ESFA provision, and obviously from different places. So, you know, what we think is the open data standard, if we're able to do that from level 1 up to level 9, will mean that we'll be able to get a really good picture of all provision that's available. What you may find is that it may not necessarily go into a tool around demand, but it may go into a tool that shows duplication and overlap. Sorry, David.
No, not at all. I mean, on that point, and I think there are a couple of others in the chat it might be worth bringing out, on particularly around adult and community learning provision. The way this tool's been constructed, and Caroline, Becky will correct me if I'm not describing it entirely correctly, was to look very much at the standard occupational classification. So to look at those courses which could conceivably be mapped pretty directly to an occupation, which meant that it's much less easy to look at lower level courses through that lens particularly, and a lot of this is spelt out in a bit more detail in the methodology in the report itself, but that was the thinking behind it. And I wanted to just come back to a point that Daryl D'Souza had made in the chat, that yes, viewed in one way, what the tool suggests is relatively low demand for level 2 and 3 courses, but of course some of this is around interpretation, isn't it? But quite often in the FE space, that's seen as progression, quite rightly, to not directly into a job, but to different types of and different levels of training. So it is open to interpretation, absolutely, but the intention wasn't to showcase that particularly. But of course, that's one way that the data could be manipulated. So I suppose a note of caution for users, really. I'll leave it there. I think we've picked up most of the other points in the chat, which has been really helpful. I
think okay, so I think what we what we've said is that if people want further questions, then if you send your email a question to Lisa, we can sort of respond to that separately. So whilst I sort of talk through the last slide and what next, if you want further information links, just email Lisa with your email address and we'll make sure that comes through. So let's try sharing my screen again. See, the text seems to have, well, no, I shouldn't say things like that, should I? Tempt fate. So what next? So let's have a think about where we go, where we're going next. Well, obviously we've gone away and we've done lots of work behind the scenes, but actually we want you to test and use the tool and provide feedback, because obviously your use of it, we've tried to keep it as simple as possible. We recognise that, you know, if you're a data analyst or a data scientist, you'd want to get your hands on the data behind all of this, and that will be available if people want it. So I think that's just also important to mention, David, isn't it, that there is a whole set of other data that sits behind all of this that people can access. What this does is an interactive tool. It gives you the top line details, and there's also the report. But we want sort of feedback, and we're looking at the next version of the tool later on this year. So that would be really helpful to get your feedback. We are going to want all providers to send in their course data, and we've developed guidance on how to do this. But I think very simply, we just want you to source the SOC code for each of your courses, because if you do that, we've already got a comprehensive list because we've had to do that manually. But you know, whether you're a private provider, whether you're an adult learning provider, or whether you're an entry-level provider, whatever that apprenticeship provider, whatever that looks like, you know, as long as we've got the SOC code, we can stick it in the tool. So the SOC is king. And I think I've just mentioned before that we've got some conversations happening with the Open Data Institute about looking at how do we scale this, how do we bring in all of the data together, and what's the best platform for doing. Obviously we're using Google Sheets, but that's, you know, that's simple because again, it's not costing anything, it's free software. But what does that mean in the future? So that's question number one. And how do we do it? How do we make sure that there is a common accord or agreement between all providers in the West London area, or anyone that's providing training to West London residents, that the data can be available. The second thing is actually there are several other things that are happening in this space that have direct relevance to this. LMI for All, for example, is a great tool that we would like to be able to link to, because I think, you know, if you're able to take this data and relate it to a careers advisor or parent or young person or adult trying to find course details, if they're able to say, well, actually, I'd like to be this, but you know, what would that mean if what are the courses available in Barnet for me to be able to do that? You can see that there could be a really good connection between LMI for All. We haven't spoken to them yet. I know we've looked at LMI for All as part of the scoping, but wouldn't that be great if we can connect those things together? And then on top of that, we've also talked to Nesta's future work team, and they've developed this thing called Careers Causeways, which has looked at jobs and the open jobs, looked at jobs at risk of COVID and the skill sets that different jobs have that can help people move from one job to another. That's interesting. We think we may be able to do that, and if you're able to do that, you've then got a platform that helps learners then think about, well, if I've done this course and it's got these skills, or I've got these skills, maybe if I just do this bit of another course or something else here, I'll be able to be to work in this area. So there is a real potential to scale all this together. All of this data is open source, all of its data is available in the public domain, but it doesn't connect, and I feel really excited that there's an opportunity to do that. And I know the GLA have actually just put up a call for a digital challenge program around this, so we'll be looking at seeing whether we can secure funding to take this to the next stage. And I think, David, we're also looking at sourcing other funding to sort of develop the tool. And I think the only thing I would say is if you do use any of the tool in any reports publications, just credit it or share it or link it, and so that, you know, as many people as possible get their chance to have a look at it and use it. And I'm hoping it's not going to be one of those things that just sits idly on a website and nobody uses it, because a lot of time's gone into it, and you know, hopefully it's going to be a useful resource. But only it will only be useful if people know about it, so please share it. And I think that's probably all I want to say on the next steps, David. And stop sharing and probably take up any other conversations.
No, I think that sums it up, Caroline. Hopefully this has given everyone on the call a good insight, and of course anybody that watches this as it's being recorded through another channel. I suppose before we wrap up, we did allow a further 15 minutes in case there were any outstanding questions. So I'll hand back to you, Caroline, but if there are any other questions, I see there's a question from Sophie around the supporting data we might want to pick up, but of course anything else while we have Caroline, Lisa and Becky with us, particularly on the technical side.
Yeah, there was just a question on the data as you mentioned it, Caroline. So would we have to request the supporting data from you, or is it readily available for download?
So WLA hold all of the data sources and the information and material. I suppose what we wouldn't want to do is to have people sort of just being able to access all the source data behind all of it until, well, I don't know, David, it can be used, so it's not a problem. I suppose it's just making sure that people people with the right skills level get to the right data. So it might be that perhaps on the site it has for analysts and for non-researchers, which is the dashboard, and then for analysts as separate links for all of the source data.
Yeah, I suspect how we'll handle it in the first instance is putting a link on our website in due course, imminently, I would hope, to both the final report and the link to the tool. And for any of the supporting data, as Caroline says, there's no secrecy around it, but there's an awful lot of raw data there, so it might be something that we provide on request, but make that quite clear on the website.
Yeah, that's it. There's just more comments that is generally found very useful, and everyone's keen to see how it scales up and develops.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would just like to end with is that this is a sort of new territory for everybody. And obviously we've had the opportunity to sort of work together with providers, with WLA to get to this point. And again, let's just, I think, treat this as a real opportunity for the future. And I'm hoping that this will really, be a moment in time that you can kind of look back on and say, I'm glad we did this, because look what's changed and look what we've been able to do with it. So yeah, and I'd just like to say thank you to my colleagues, Becky, James and others at IES, and my poor colleagues that were poring over the SOC data for getting us to this far. And obviously to David for all his advice and guidance and support on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline.
Okay, so this is now, I think we should stop the webinar now. A link to this webinar will be available, so people can watch it who weren't able to attend. The slides will be available, so we can send those out to everybody. If people do have any problems or challenges, then please get in touch and we'll try and help you. Okay, thank you very much and have a great day.